It was supposed to be just another night, a long shift, a sore shoulder, a quiet walk to the car. But in a flash, a young nurse named Julia Benton made a decision that would ripple far beyond the hospital parking lot. She didn't know the man bleeding on the ground. She didn't know he was being hunted. She didn't even know if she would survive the gunfire. But she ran toward danger, not away from it. What she did next wouldn't make headlines, but it would save hundreds of lives. This is the story of quiet courage, of a father's quiet lessons echoed through action, and of a woman who showed the world what it truly means to serve without ever wearing a uniform. And in the end, when 12 Marines stood in silent formation, saluting a woman the world might never know, it wasn't just about honor. It was about the difference one moment of compassion can make. "Gun! Watch out!" The scream tore across the hospital parking lot like a blade through still air. Julia Benton, 28 years old and bone-tired from another punishing ER shift, didn't hesitate. As soon as she heard it, then saw the man collapse, blood blooming fast across his shirt, her instincts overrode exhaustion. She sprinted. No thought, just motion. That's when she saw the black SUV barreling toward them, tires shrieking on wet pavement. And then came the gunfire. The others froze. Julia didn't. She didn't know the man lying there, didn't know if he was a patient, a criminal, or just someone in the wrong place at the wrong time. It didn't matter. She launched herself forward, her body instinctively choosing to shield his. The bullet struck her in the shoulder. The impact spun her and threw her down beside him, her body thudding hard against the concrete. Pain tore through her, hot and instant. But her eyes remained on the man, trying to see if he was still breathing. Darkness came next. Days later, with her shoulders still heavily bandaged and her mind struggling to process what had happened, Julia walked into the hospital lobby. She hadn't expected anything more than a follow-up. But there they were, 12 Marines standing in crisp uniform, forming a silent wall of presence. One step forward. "You saved my life," he said, and more than that. Whatever came next silenced the entire hospital. Julia Benton understood silence better than most. But hers wasn't the silence of absence. It was the kind that held weight, that carried meaning. She'd grown up surrounded by it, in a stretch of quiet country just outside Mountain Home, Arkansas. The land was still and unchanging, with dusty roads, distant neighbors, and nights so eerily calm you could hear the coyotes howling long before they appeared. Her childhood home sat nestled in the woods, a small, weather-worn farmhouse wrapped in a ring of pine trees that murmured with every passing wind. Her father, Roy Benton, had once been a formidable figure, a Gulf War veteran with strong shoulders and hands calloused from labor. But years had etched themselves deep into his body. A roadside bomb had left him with a limp and permanent nerve damage on one side. Still, he never once complained. Every morning, like clockwork, he woke at 5 a.m., limping out to the shed behind the house, even if the only thing he could manage was organizing rusty screws into old coffee cans. His workshop smelled of oil, wood, and quiet perseverance. He believed in work, in discipline, in doing what's right even when no one sees you. Her mother, by contrast, had been the soul of softness in the home. Laughter, warmth, the reason birthdays mattered, and Thanksgiving felt magical. But when Julia was just 10, her mother fell ill and passed in a matter of weeks. The loss shattered Roy, though he never showed it. For Julia, it was like the light in the house had gone out for good. After that, the silence grew heavier. But from it, Julia absorbed her father's lessons. He didn't raise her to chase wealth or fame. He raised her to be steady, to stand her ground when everything else shifted, to be the person others leaned on. Right is still right, he'd say, even if you're the only one doing it. Those words, repeated so often they etched into her bones, shaped who she became. In school, she was the one who volunteered when others rolled their eyes. She followed rules even when it cost her popularity, even when it made her feel like she didn't quite belong. And when it came time for college, Julia didn't apply to fancy schools or dream of big cities. She chose the University of Central Arkansas. Not for prestige, but because it had a strong nursing program and was close enough to come home on weekends. But college wasn't easy. To keep her dream alive, Julia worked nights at a local diner, refilling chipped mugs for tired truckers, wiping sticky booths, and sweeping floors long after the lights went down. After clinical rotations that left her aching, she'd sometimes get home well past midnight, only to rise at 6 a.m. for another full day of lectures. Her classmates rarely noticed how often she skipped lunch to stretch gas money or how little sleep she got. But she never complained. There was a rhythm to her life: study, serve, sleep, repeat. What she lacked in privilege, she made up for in grit. Her professors noted her unwavering focus. Patients sensed her kindness and calm. She wasn't the loudest voice in any room, but people trusted her. And through all of it, her father saw her. On Sunday evenings when she drove home for supper, they'd sit together on the porch. Just the two of them, the setting sun dipping behind the pines. Sometimes they spoke about the war, about life and loss, about the kind of person the world needed more of. Other times they said nothing at all. You don't need a title to make a difference, Roy once told her brother, as they watched the sky shift colors. You just need to show up when it counts. She had no idea then just how much those words would one day mean. That on a Tuesday night, with no warning, she'd be handed the kind of moment that truly counted. And without thinking, she'd step into it. That night had started like any other. Julia had just wrapped up a brutal 12-hour shift at St. Vincent Memorial's emergency room. The final hours had been chaos. 3 trauma patients arriving from a multi-car accident on the highway. 2 were airlifted out. 1 flatlined twice before they managed to stabilize him. Even after her shift technically ended, Julia stayed to help a new nurse with the 3rd patient. Then she took another hour to catch up on the mountain of unfinished charts. By the time she finally clocked out, the hospital halls were dark, the hum of the overhead lights softer than usual. She tied her hair back, pulled on her old denim jacket over her scrubs, and slung her worn-out bag over one sore shoulder. The drizzle outside had painted the parking lot in silver reflections. The wet concrete shimmered under the tall lamps, each puddle catching little halos of light. Her car, a beat-up Honda she'd driven since nursing school, waited near the far edge of the lot. She was halfway there, her hand already fishing for her keys, when a sickening sound stopped her cold. A wet thud. She turned sharply. Near the parking garage entrance, she saw a man, military jacket torn, boots scuffed, stumble and fall. Blood quickly soaked through his shirt. Julia didn't think. She ran, and that's when everything changed. His jacket had collapsed against him, his body twisted awkwardly on the cold asphalt. Blood soaked through his shirt in fast, dark blooms. Too much, too fast, too deep. Julia's training kicked in before her brain could fully register the horror. Internal bleeding. Critical. Deadly. But the world didn't seem to react. A young couple hesitated nearby, looked, then turned and walked away. Another man stood still, phone in hand, not to call for help, but to record. Meanwhile, the injured man tried to wave them off weakly, his hand trembling as he struggled to remain upright. He didn't cry out, he didn't plead. His eyes were wide, scanning the parking lot with laser focus, not on people, but on something else. Then Julia saw it too. Headlights, a black SUV, windows tinted, no plates, moving far too fast for a hospital lot. It wasn't stopping. It wasn't searching for parking. It was on a mission. Hunting. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run. She could have darted back to her car, found cover behind the row of hospital carts, crouched low and waited for it all to pass. But something deeper, more primal than logic, older than her medical training, surged forward and took control. She ran, not away, toward him. "Call 911," she shouted behind her, though she didn't know if anyone would listen. Her shoes slapped against the pavement as she sprinted across the nearly empty lot. The man was trying to push himself up, his arms trembling, his face a mask of pain. She reached him just as the SUV skidded to a sharp halt, 20 feet away. The driver's side window rolled down. Flash. The burst of light from the muzzle lit the inside of the vehicle like a camera flash. The first shot cracked through the night. Julia dove forward, throwing her arms around the man's shoulders, her body curving over his like a human shield. The pain came a second later, searing, blinding, slicing through her left shoulder like fire, spinning her sideways. Her legs buckled and she slammed onto the pavement, her head cracking hard against the ground. Her vision collapsed into scattered light and muffled sound, her world shrinking. Even through the blur of agony, she remembered the man's eyes. They weren't afraid. They were filled with stunned disbelief. Not just that she'd taken the bullet for him, but that anyone would. The SUV peeled out, tires screeching into the dark as it disappeared before anyone could act. Silence followed. Julia lay next to him, bleeding, her breath shallow, chest heaving from shock. Darkness clawed at her edges. She fought it, tried to speak, tried to stay awake. Only one question left her lips, barely a whisper. "You safe?" Then the world went black. And that was when her real story began. The first thing Julia felt was weight, a deep, dull pressure centered in her shoulder. Then came the sterile bite of antiseptic, the soft beeping of a heart monitor, and the low hum of hospital fluorescence. She was alive. Her eyes fluttered open to a blurred ceiling. It took a moment before the memory returned. The wet pavement, the bleeding man, the SUV, the gunfire. A nurse in blue scrubs appeared at her side. "Julia, you're in the ICU. You were shot, but you're stable now." Julia blinked slowly, trying to make sense of it. "The man, what about him?" she asked, her voice thin. The nurse hesitated, checked the chart. "You were the only one brought in that night. No other victim was found at the scene." Julia stared at her. "That's not possible," she whispered. "He was right there. I was trying to protect him." Later that day, Dr. Levinson, her supervising physician, came into the room. His face was calm, unreadable. "The bullet went clean through," he told her. "You lost quite a bit of blood, but it missed anything vital." "You're lucky." Julia winced as she tried to shift. "Where is he? The man from the parking lot?" The doctor shifted awkwardly. "Julia, we reviewed the security footage. No other person was seen. No one else was reported injured. No ambulance picked up another victim. The police think it was an attempted mugging. You may have been the target." "No," Julia said, voice firm despite her pain. "I saw him. He was bleeding badly. Military jacket. I covered him with my body." Levinson gave her a kind but skeptical nod. "You need to rest. Try not to dwell on it right now." But rest didn't come. Not with his words echoing in her head. You were the only one. The next day, a few coworkers came by. Flowers, cards, polite, awkward smiles. But their words stung more than the wound. "I heard it was gang-related," whispered Danny from the ICU. "Julia, someone said the guy you tried to save was a drug dealer," added Nick, a trauma nurse. "You took a bullet for a lowlife." Julia turned her face away, staring out the window. They didn't understand. She hadn't stopped to ask who he was. She'd only seen someone hurt, alone, dying. And she did what her father always taught her. You don't ask if they deserve help, you ask if they need it. That night, after visiting, hours had ended and the halls were quiet. Julia noticed something on her bedside table. A plain white envelope. No one had said anything about it. Her name was written across the front. No return address, no markings. Inside, a short note, handwritten in clean, sharp strokes. "No one can know who I am, but I know who you are. You didn't just save me, you saved more than one life. What you did in that parking lot ensured a mission could continue, one that will protect countless others. I owe you everything. LT 4th Recon Unit, MRF." Julia read it once, then again, 5 times. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. She hadn't imagined him. And suddenly the silence in that hospital room didn't feel so empty anymore. Julia stared at the letter again. At first she had thought it was a prank, the way it referenced a mission, the formal phrasing, the cryptic tone, but the details were too sharp, too specific. The signature carried weight. The language wasn't the kind you use casually. And the memory, his jacket, standard military issue, worn from use but intact, was still vivid in her mind. She could still picture him waving people away, not out of fear or confusion, but out of instinct. He was trying to protect them, not himself. That stuck with her. Over the next 24 hours, little things began to catch her attention. 2 men lingered in the hallway outside her hospital room. They wore standard maintenance uniforms, yet they never once emptied a trash can or carried any tools. Their posture wasn't casual. It was military, eyes straight, backs rigid. They didn't talk to the hospital staff. When Julia asked the nurses who they were, the reply was vague. Just extra security, they said. Later that night, when she reached for her water glass, she spotted something on the bedside table that hadn't been there before, a coin. It was old, the metal worn and dulled by time, but the emblem was unmistakable, the United States Marine Corps. This wasn't a souvenir someone picked up at a store. This was something earned, a challenge coin. And suddenly, the pieces began to align in her mind. She hadn't saved just a bystander that night in the hospital parking lot. She had thrown herself into the line of fire, literally, to shield someone. Someone targeted, and now someone didn't want her to know why. By morning, Julia Benton wasn't just a nurse recovering from a traumatic incident. She was alert, watching, listening, collecting details. She noticed how the two supposed maintenance men never swapped shifts. They didn't carry radios, but they communicated without speaking. They were just too still, too aware. And when Julia tried to meet one of their eyes, he turned away instantly, like acknowledging her would break protocol. She wasn't being paranoid. She'd worked in enough trauma units to know what quiet vigilance looked like. She'd seen plainclothes officers guarding politicians or celebrities. But this was different. No one was saying a word, and yet she could feel it. Every movement, every breath was being watched. Then came the woman in blue. Mid-morning, dressed in pale scrubs, carrying a tray of fresh bandages. Julia didn't recognize her, and that was rare after 3 years at St. Vincent. She knew nearly every nurse by name and face. The woman didn't speak, just cleaned and redressed Julia's wound with a calm, professional precision. And just as she turned to go, she leaned in, too close, and whispered, "He's alive, and he's grateful." Before Julia could react, the woman was already out the door. Shocked, Julia immediately pressed the call button and demanded to know who that nurse was. The nurse at the station checked the records and calmly informed her. There was no one by that name on shift today. No one matching that description was even assigned to her floor. That night, Julia couldn't sleep. She lay there, staring at the coin on her bedside table. It was heavy in her palm, real and undeniable. The weathered surface still bore the Marine insignia, but it was the etching along the edge that drew her focus now. 4th Recon, MRF. She didn't have military experience, but her father had. He'd told her what challenge coins really meant. They were tokens of deep respect, symbols of unbreakable trust and sacrifice. Not given lightly. Often passed hand to hand in silence, at moments that truly mattered. So why had she been given one? And then the man's face from that night returned to her memory. The way he looked at her, not with fear or confusion, but something else. Recognition. Not of her as a person, but of what she had done. Julia's heart pounded as she slowly sat upright, ignoring the throb in her shoulder. She wasn't imagining this. She hadn't saved just anyone. That man had been important, mission critical, and someone out there had gone to great lengths to ensure the entire incident disappeared. She began replaying the night in her mind, frame by frame. The black SUV without license plates. The dead silence after the gunshot. No police reports filed, no interviews, no news coverage. It was like it never happened. Someone had made sure her involvement stayed buried. And then came the final confirmation. At 2 a.m., restless and needing answers, she crept to her hospital room door and slowly cracked it open. Down the corridor, one of the maintenance men was speaking into a discreet mic on his shoulder. His voice was low, precise. Target remained stable, no unusual movement. Surveillance to continue through morning. Target, not patient, not nurse, target. Julia closed the door quietly, her pulse quickening. This wasn't protection, this was containment. She was being watched, closely, and not just because of what she did, but because of what she now knew. The letter had said she saved more than one life. Did that mean there was an operation underway that night? Had she interfered in something classified? Was the man she saved carrying something? Something worth killing for? Whatever the answer, someone wanted to keep her quiet, but alive. She looked at the challenge coin again, her fingers brushing over the edges. Whatever had happened in that parking lot hadn't ended. And now she knew. This wasn't just about a stranger's life. It was about a mission, about secrets, about something buried deep. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Just before sunset it came, firm, not rushed, not hesitant, purposeful. Julia looked up, expecting a nurse or maybe the administrator with her discharge papers. But it wasn't either. A tall man stepped into the room, his presence commanding instant attention. He wore a Marine Corps dress uniform, ribbons spanning across his chest like a spectrum of service. His back was straight as a steel beam, and his eyes, steel gray, locked onto hers with unwavering intensity. In one fluid motion, he removed his cap and gave a respectful nod. "Miss Benton," he said, his voice low and measured. "May I sit?" Julia nodded, her mouth dry, heart pounding. He eased into the chair beside her bed, placing the cap carefully on his lap. "My name is Colonel Thomas Granger, United States Marine Corps." The colonel's voice was firm yet calm. "I'm retired from the Corps. I'm not here in any official capacity, and what I'm about to share isn't on any record. But you have a right to know." Julia Benton said nothing. She watched him closely, her eyes searching his weathered face, waiting. Colonel Granger gave a quick glance toward the hallway, ensuring they were alone. Then he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "The man you saved in the parking lot, he's Commander Ethan Rohr. He's one of our highest-ranking special operations officers. He had just returned from an international mission when he was intercepted." Julia's breath caught. "Intercepted?" "It wasn't a random attack," the colonel continued. "The SUV that opened fire was part of a coordinated assassination attempt." Julia blinked, stunned. "Assassination?" Granger nodded solemnly. "He was carrying sensitive intelligence, not on paper, not on a phone. It was all in his memory. He had been embedded for 8 days with foreign contacts, collecting detailed information on multiple planned attacks. What he carried was urgent. If lost, it couldn't be recovered." Julia's thoughts spun wildly. To her, that night had been chaos, a man bleeding out in the dark, a scream, the smell of gunpowder. She'd never imagined she was at the center of something much larger. Granger's voice was steady. He refused air extraction, said it would risk the lives of his team and draw too much attention. So he insisted on walking out on foot. He chose a civilian route, but someone leaked his movement. They knew exactly where to find him. Julia's voice was barely a whisper. "And I just happened to be there." "No," the colonel said, meeting her gaze. "You didn't just happen to be there. You made a choice. When others would have frozen or run, you stepped in. You acted." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Carefully, he unfolded it in front of her. Julia's heart skipped. There it was, the Marine Challenge coin she remembered from her hospital bedside. But beside it now rested a dark pin, discreet and unassuming, embossed with the insignia of the 4th Reconnaissance Battalion. "This is Commander Rohr's personal coin," Granger explained. "It's not given lightly, only to those who save a fellow Marine in combat. He left it for you." Julia stared at the coin, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. Her voice cracked. "Is he alive?" Granger nodded. "He's recovering, quietly and safely. Thanks to you, he had the precious seconds he needed to escape and for his team to extract him. Because of that, we were able to intercept and neutralize 3 planned attacks on U.S. embassies within 72 hours. She froze. "3?" she repeated faintly. He nodded again. "Our analysts estimate hundreds of lives were saved." Her hand flew to her mouth, tears blurring her vision. "But I'm nobody," she whispered. "I was just doing what I've always been taught. Help people. That's it." A small, genuine smile tugged at the corner of Granger's mouth, softening his otherwise commanding features. "And that," he said gently, "is exactly why it matters. You didn't act because someone ordered you to. You did it because it was right. That kind of instinct, most people don't have it, not even in uniform." He began to rise, carefully folding the cloth but leaving the coin and the pin in Julia's open hand. "There won't be an official medal, no headlines, no press conference. Everything remains classified." Julia nodded. She didn't need recognition. She just needed to understand. As he reached the door, he paused. "Commander Rohr and his team, They wanted to find a way to thank you. Personally, quietly. Tomorrow morning, before your discharge, there'll be a small ceremony. No reporters, just Marines. A moment we believe you've earned." He turned one last time and his voice softened again. "You changed the course of events that night. You didn't just save a man, you preserved a mission. You saved lives, and now those lives remember you." Then, placing his cap back on with a respectful nod, he brought his hand up in a slow, sincere salute, one soldier to another, and left the room. Julia remained seated, unmoving, the cold coin pressed into her palm like a truth she'd only just begun to grasp. Her father's words came flooding back. "Right is still right, even if you're the only one doing it." She hadn't just been in the right place. She had been the right person. The morning light poured through the hospital window, casting long golden streaks across the floor. Julia Benton sat on the edge of the hospital bed, one arm in a sling, the ache in her shoulder dull and steady. But it wasn't the pain that filled her chest. It was the echo of last night's conversation. The colonel's words had rooted deep inside her. "A small ceremony, just Marines, a moment you deserve." She dressed slowly, deliberately, pulling on a crisp button-down and a pair of clean dark jeans. It wasn't much, but it felt like a quiet stand of dignity after days in hospital gowns. Dr. Levinson arrived to check her vitals. His tone was softer than usual, almost reverent. "Before you're discharged," he said, "there are some people in the lobby who would like to meet you." She simply nodded, afraid that if she spoke, her voice would crack. The walk through the corridor felt endless. Her heart pounded harder with every step, not from fear, but from something deeper, disbelief, emotion, and a quiet kind of awe. When the elevator doors opened into the hospital's main lobby, Julia froze. 12 Marines stood in perfect formation at the center of the room. They wore full dress blues, posture razor straight, boots gleaming like mirrors. Their eyes didn't wander. They stared ahead, not with detachment, but with solemn pride. All around them, a quiet circle had formed. Patients in wheelchairs, nurses pausing in mid-shift, custodians standing respectfully. No one spoke. The chatter and noise that usually filled the lobby had given way to reverence. And at the heart of it all, Julia stood, silent, stunned, her heart full. The formation stood in solemn silence. Not a word, not a breath out of place. Commander Ethan Rohr stood at the front, steady and commanding. His right arm was wrapped in thick bandages, but his posture remained unwavering. Shoulders back, chest lifted, eyes focused. The moment Julia appeared at the entrance, he stepped forward, gaze locked onto hers. He didn't smile exactly, but there was a look in his eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. There was honor there, deep gratitude, a gravity that made the air feel heavier around them. "Nurse Julia Benton," he began, his voice even but thick with emotion. "4 nights ago, you made a decision that changed lives, some of whom you'll never even know." He paused for just a breath, then continued. "You saw danger and didn't run. You saw a stranger bleeding and treated him like he was your own. You had no idea who I was. You didn't know what was at stake, but you moved, without pause, without question, because that's just who you are." The words struck her like a sudden wave. Julia's throat tightened, her eyes shimmered. She could feel the pressure of the moment mounting in her chest. Commander Rohr gave a subtle nod. In one seamless motion, the 12 Marines standing behind him came to attention. Their boots struck the tile in perfect unison, the sound echoing like a heartbeat in the sterile corridor. As one, they raised their hands in salute, every movement crisp and full of reverence. It was the kind of moment no photograph could ever truly capture, one that didn't need medals or headlines to hold meaning. While the salute held firm, Commander Rohr stepped forward once more. In his hands, he carried a carefully folded American flag. He offered it to her with both hands. "This flag flew over our base in Syria," he told her. "During the mission, your actions helped protect. It's been to places most Americans will never step foot in. And it came home because of what you did." Julia reached out with trembling hands. The fabric felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried all the weight of what it represented. She accepted it slowly, reverently. Then he held out something smaller. his personal challenge coin. Julia recognized it immediately. It was the same coin she had seen placed quietly on her bedside table days ago. But this time, he offered it directly, formally. "Only one is issued to each Marine," he said, his voice lowered. "But this one belongs to you now, not for bravery in battle, but for courage and compassion." Her eyes filled with tears, her voice barely more than a breath. "I just did what anyone should do." Commander Rohr's lips curved into a soft, knowing smile. "That's exactly why you're a hero." He stepped back, and in perfect unison, the Marines lowered their salute. The silence that followed was broken by a gentle ripple of applause, at first soft, almost tentative. Then it grew, stronger, fuller, until it filled the hallway. Nurses clapped, patients clapped. Even the hospital security guards dabbed at their eyes while nodding in quiet acknowledgement. Julia stood at the center of it all, motionless, one hand cradling the folded flag, the other holding the coin. Her heart was overwhelmed, caught between disbelief and a dawning sense of meaning. Her father's words returned to her again, clear in her mind. Right is still right, even if you're the only one doing it. And for the first time since that harrowing night in the parking lot, she allowed herself to believe something she hadn't dared to before, that she hadn't just helped a man survive. She had made a choice that rippled beyond what she could see. She had changed something, someone, maybe more than one person. So what makes a hero? Is it the uniform, the rank, the shiny medals? Or is it the quiet, almost invisible moment between instinct and fear, when a person decides to act, not because it's expected, but simply because it's right? Julia Benton never saw herself as a hero. She wasn't trained in combat. She never carried a weapon or answered to a commanding officer. She was just a nurse, exhausted, underpaid, running on coffee and stubborn willpower, who had happened to walk into a hospital parking lot at exactly the right time. And that one night changed more than one life. It reminded everyone of something that too often gets lost in today's world of instant reactions and digital disconnection. That real courage isn't always loud. It doesn't always rush into burning buildings. It doesn't always get noticed. Sometimes it looks like a woman with a strained shoulder and a worn-out bag who sees someone bleeding and doesn't look away, who steps forward when it would be easier to retreat. Her decision wasn't reckless. It came from instinct, yes, but it was also shaped by a lifetime of quiet strength, by a childhood where resilience was daily practice, and a father who taught her that doing the right thing didn't need applause. That parking lot became a battlefield of a different kind, one where compassion met violence, where empathy proved stronger than bullets. Julia never asked who the man was. She never asked if he deserved saving. She didn't pause to weigh politics or uniforms or pasts. She simply saw a human being in pain and ran to him. And that is what made her story extraordinary. But perhaps the most remarkable part is this. Her story isn't isolated. All across the country, there are quiet acts of bravery happening every day. Nurses holding the hands of patients who have no one else. Teachers using their own money to feed hungry students. Strangers stopping in traffic to help push a stalled car. Veterans donating their time at shelters. Seniors checking in on neighbors with groceries and warmth. It's the quiet, everyday courage. The unseen sacrifice. What Julia did was monumental, but also in a way a mirror. A reflection of the kind of people we could all choose to be, if we were just a little braver, a little kinder, a little more willing to step in, especially when no one's watching. So maybe the real question isn't just about what happened that night. Maybe it's about what you would do. Would you stop? Would you step in? Would you stand in harm's way for someone you've never met? And if you already have, if in some moment you have acted purely from instinct to help someone in need, then perhaps you're part of something bigger than you ever realized. Because sometimes the bravest people among us are the ones who never even think of themselves as heroes. A week after she was discharged, Julia Benton returned to the familiar creaking swing on her father's porch, nestled deep in rural Arkansas. The same tall pine trees lined the edge of the yard, swaying and whispering in the breeze like they always had. But Julia wasn't the same. Something inside her had shifted. The sling still hugged her shoulder, and every step she took showed the weight of recovery. But there was something different in her presence now. Not arrogance, not even pride, but a still, quiet strength that settled in her posture, like someone who had seen something raw and real and come back changed. On a small shelf by the window sat a handcrafted wooden box her father had made. Simple, sturdy, like him. Inside it lay a folded American flag, the challenge coin she'd been given, nestled among old black and white family photos, and a pair of rusted dog tags from his own service in the Gulf War. It wasn't a shrine, it was something gentler, more like a quiet remembrance of things that mattered. When Julia arrived, her father hadn't said much. He didn't need to. He'd simply poured her a cup of coffee, handed her a wool blanket from the back of the chair, and sat down beside her on the swing. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of understanding, of shared history, of the things that didn't need to be spoken. After a long while, without turning his head, he finally said, "I always knew you'd do something that mattered." Julia didn't answer. She didn't have to. Life outside would go on. The world would keep spinning. Her name wouldn't appear in any headline, and no reporters would come knocking. The lobby of that hospital, the place where she had made her choice, where everything could have gone so differently, would fade back into routine, and no one beyond its walls would know what she had prevented. But recognition was never the reason. Maybe that's the truth of it all, the deeper lesson hidden beneath uniforms and medals. Being a hero doesn't always look the way we imagine. Sometimes it isn't about grand gestures or global impact. Sometimes it's just being there, in one critical moment, and choosing not to turn away. To everyone listening right now, have you ever had a moment like Julia's? Maybe it wasn't dramatic or life-threatening. Maybe you just chose to stand by someone who needed it. Maybe you helped a stranger, spoke out when silence was easier, or gave something of yourself without expecting anything back. If you have, we want to hear it. Drop your story in the comments. Let others feel the quiet courage that still lives in people today. Because those moments, your moments, matter. And if what Julia did moved you, please share this video. Subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that hold a mirror to who we are when we're at our very best. Because the truth is, you don't need to wear a uniform to serve. You just need to be the right person at the right time.